Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the meeting. I think we can start. It's on time. And this meeting was really because we couldn't have the sound on the last Zoom. So I've opened it up to everybody. Nobody needed to register. Everybody got the link. So this is a freebie. I think I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin. So today's talk is on fear versus love. And the whole point of the talk is not to get into fear, but to get out of fear, to use fear as a catalyst for change and for transformation, and to choose love. Fear has many different guises, very many different emotions, both skillful and unskillful, as does love. But we already focused a lot on love in the previous talks, especially on the love triangle. And essentially, we're not going to talk much about that except towards the end of the trip when we can really focus on summarizing the remedies. So just to remind you, we did a lot on the Tree of Life, and there are 5 loves on the Tree of Life. You can see them in purple, and most of them are on the right-hand side. 2 of them are in the center. And there are 5 fears as well on the left-hand side. The same thing, 3 on the left-hand side and 2 in the center. The love vibration expands and the fear vibration contracts, and we want to be in the middle. So it's a question of balancing the two. So Aldo Leopold said it must be a poor life that achieves freedom from fear. We need fear. In a sense, fear is a catalyst for change, and there's no conflict that doesn't also have an opportunity. The ancestors say that if the burden were taken away, the lesson would not be there. What's important is what will count. It's how you handle it that what'll make a difference. So the love vibration, which is in the love triangle, once you reach the love triangle, we reach into our skillful emotions. When we are below that, we have more to do with monkey mind, the shadow, and ego, and more to do with survival. So above the love triad, it's all about growth. Below it, it's all about survival, and we're going to talk about that. So I love these sayings of Piccola Estes, but basically she's talking about the triad of love, which is balanced by mercy and judgment on the other side. And judgment has a lot to do with cynicism. And in the center, of course, is compassion, empathy, and forgiveness. So she says, fear not loving while you have a chance, fear becoming bitter, fear cynicism, fear turning to stone, fear living underwhelmed by everything. In other words, fear complacency and embrace change. And then she says, be fearful and bless others, be fearful and be merciful, be fearful and forgive, be fearful and do, be fearful and love. So she sort of coins the whole thing about the love triangle, which I'm going to leave now, and we're going to focus more on the fear side of things. The ancestors say that to be totally fearless is foolish, that courage is to act in the face of fear. No fear means no courage is required. So if you look at base jumpers and people who do solo climbing without ropes, free solo, these folks are not crazy and they're not stupid. They're very, very meticulous. They know exactly what they're doing, but they have a different approach to fear compared to the rest of us. They don't have the same visceral attitude to fear. It's interesting that if you study, or people have studied base jumpers, and they found that although a lot of them die, or they've seen their friends die, they also get severe injuries, often crippled for a while. They always go back because there seems to be the tension between fear and what euphoria is. So there's so much overwhelming stuff in favor of euphoria that they don't care if they die. It's just going to be worth it to them. They've actually shown in some of these people that have been studied with functional MRI studies that the amygdala, that's the seat of emotion, doesn't respond the same way as ours does. It's more muted when they have to look at horrific events, and they don't get this visceral feeling about fear that we do, but they have courage, and they're not stupid, because no fear is really being stupid or either crazy. So narrow mind is intimidated by fear and enslaves itself to it. Narrow mind is monkey mind, it's primitive mind, survival mind. Functional MRI studies show it's in the primitive brain, more in the midbrain, and it's connected to our sympathetic nervous system, our flight or fight reaction. And nothing really creative happens in narrow mind. It's our primitive emotions that I was talking about, our compulsions, our desires, our habits, our addictions, our hatred, anger, a desire for vengeance, envy. That's all in the narrow mind. Very important because we need it to survive. But the talk's now about getting beyond that now into the growth point. So spacious mind, that's Buddha mind, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Spacious mind recognizes the many guises of fear, some of which may sound sensible and compelling, but can be dispelled. So fear is there to be overcome, not to look for it, not to go towards it, but when it comes your way, then to take mind of it. Spacious mind, on the other hand, if you study functional MRI studies, is in the prefrontal lobe of the brain. And if they look at meditators, they find that they default to the prefrontal lobe very easily. They do go into the primitive brain in survival situations, but they immediately come back. So they have much less in the way of PTSD. Interestingly, base jumpers don't have PTSD either. They don't have any of that. They're kind of like an animal that survived a lion attack. They just carry on regardless of what happened before. So spacious mind is about our higher consciousness. It's about our discriminations, our discernment, our notions, our ideas, our ideals, all those kind of things which really are in spacious mind. And most of us, because we don't have a spiritual practice or we're not practicing enough, we default to narrow mind in the primitive brain or monkey mind. But we are able to default to the spacious mind in the prefrontal lobe if we do enough spiritual practice. No magic to it. So in summary, if you look at it, on the left side is fear, on the right side is love, on the right side is the parasympathetic relaxation response, on the left side is a sympathetic flight or fight response, on the right is feeling, on the left is emotion, on the right is growth, on the left is survival. We're talking about spacious mind versus monkey mind and eustress versus distress. The only way you're going to get into the prefrontal lobe is with some kind of spiritual practice. Otherwise, you can't read books about it. Folks with psychological disorders, unfortunately, live in monkey mind most of the time in survival mode. But the spacious mind is the gateway to creativity. It's the gateway to the field. It's the gateway to your guides and to your ancestors. So just a few other words about fear before we tackle the main fears that I'm going to list for you. There are 4 F's in the fear response. There's flight and fight, we all know about, but there's also freeze and feign death. If you look at Porges's work, a famous psychiatrist, he says that the freeze and feign death is really part of the dorsal primitive vagus, which is sort of an amphibian response, but many people disagree with him. Nevertheless, he's done very excellent work based on his theory. So there are 2 parts to the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And sympathetic basically is flight or fight. You either run away or you fight. Everybody has a different appraisal of what a threat is going to be. So this is not only genetic and maybe epigenetic, but it's also related to our upbringing, to the extent that we may have had overprotective parents that are always warning us not to do things that could have helped us, as opposed to parents who stressed their kids and made them sort of reach out to fearful events. Those are going to have a much lower threshold to distress and to fear. Now, Outward Bound and other companies, they were probably the first. They took participants into wild places. They gave them different skills to perform. They assured success in the skills, and this raised their self-mastery, their self-worth, and they did a lot of really good work. The amount of stress that was imposed depended on the intensity of the experience, and those that had the furthest to go actually gained the most. Now, the army, for instance, will increase stress to increase self-mastery by increasing the complexity of the exercise, increasing the risk and the consequences of failure, decreasing the time it takes to do the exercise, and keeping them ignorant of what they're going to do. But when I formed Inward Bound, which was really a company to try, or a little organization to try and simulate the bushman hunter-gatherer as much as possible, we also took people into wild places. But the point of it was fear was going to be there. For some people, it was terrifying. They'd never been outside of their homes, literally. So being in a wild place was terrifying. They gained actually more, often at the expense of the other participants who had to suffer their fears. But essentially, the Inward Bound was more about doing things that mattered. The people that we took on them had already attained a certain level of self-mastery. They were done with that, like you guys are listening to this talk. And when something came about, like we had to cross a river or do a sketchy, tricky mountain pass, then there was a lot of fear that would come up for some of them, but then they would get through it and they would really achieve much more. So there were two things going for them, both self-mastery and self-realization, but the whole object of the exercise and the trip was really about self-realization, connecting with the self, or what the ancestors call becoming more of who we're really supposed to be. So these are the basic causes of fear that we're going to encounter on the talk: the deep, the dark, and the steep, threat to life, limb, organ, or function, threat to the ego and being found wanting. Of these, shame and humiliation are the greatest. We're not going to talk much about the normal threats to the ego, but the other interesting thing is, if you look at expedition behavior, people are more fearful of what other people are going to think about them than the hazards of the journey. So, often pride comes before the fall, which can be thousands of feet. And a lot of people die because they don't want to be seen to be nerdy and not joining the rest of the group. But we're not going to focus on that. We're going to talk more about shame and humiliation. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I know something about that because of my divination practice. But I'll have a disclaimer, so we won't talk about that too much. Then, of course, there's religious, superstitious, the occult, and fear of the unknown. So these are the main things. I'm sure there are more, and we'll talk a little bit about those at the end. But these are the main things that create morbid fear in a lot of us: death, ill health, sickness, fear of taking a leap of faith, which is, fear of taking your metaphoric boat out of the safe harbor. Too much complacency, fear of having no meaning in our lives. Thoreau said, most men and women live lives of quiet desperation without meaning. This is tied up very much with the warrior archetype and the hero archetype, which we'll talk about. This is going to be a much bigger topic in the next talk. And then the ego self, which we're talking about, shame and humiliation, threat to the ego. Isolation, loneliness, or being alone. You can be alone, but yet not be lonely. So we'll touch on that. Soul sickness and soul loss are more common than we think. And all of these factors I'm talking about can lead to those problems. And then finally, fear of the occult. A lot of people fear those. It's interesting. They're not happy to watch them in terms of mythological experience, like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. But when you tell them it's real, then they don't want to hear about it, which is understandable. But it's important to know that these things are real. They're not mythology. Where did mythology come from? But from reality. So I'm going to stress about the fear of the known, because a lot of us are too complacent. We don't want to take our boat out of the safe harbor. Tzu says you cannot discuss the ocean with a frog. He is limited by the space he lives in. You cannot discuss ice with a summer insect who is bound to a single season. The problem here is complacency, and we all suffer from complacency. There's a story, some of you may have heard of it, about a Zen student who goes to a master of Zen and asks to be enlightened. So the master looks at him a little quizzically, and then he says, okay, let's have tea first. So the student reckons, well, this is a good start, Japanese tea ceremony. That's all very much Zen. So he thinks he's on his way. So the master brings out 2 cups and a pot, and he pours his tea into the one pot, and then he pours the tea into the other pot in front of the student on the table. and the tea fills the cup, and then it keeps pouring over the top of the cup until it's on the table and spills onto the student's lap, and he shouts up in pain. He gets up in pain and shouts, "Can't you see the cup's full?" And he says, "That's your problem. Your cup is too full. Before you need to learn Zen, you need to empty your cup." So the Zen people talk about beginner's mind. It makes me remember that in 1987, I decided in my innocence to go on a 14-day yoga retreat. And I thought I was a fairly accomplished person, but in a very narrow lane. And when I did this workshop, I found that people that were half my age knew much more about life and about the things I'm talking about that I did. So I was a little bit like that student, and I decided to make some changes. So pain is inevitable. In other words, fear is inevitable. Suffering is optional. So the Buddhists are all about relieving suffering. They believe that they are the true hedonists because they are about true happiness, true joy. And for the rest of us bound to ego, it's fleeting happiness and fleeting entertainment, and then the rest of it is all suffering. So they talk about the two rivers of suffering: uncontrolled sickness, uncontrolled aging, uncontrolled death, and uncontrolled rebirth. Well, all of those to some extent are controlled. Uncontrolled sickness and aging are controlled very well by spiritual practice. If you're a bodhisattva, you look at them as tests of your spiritual practice. Uncontrolled death, we're going to talk about. Death can be very controlled if you've paid attention to karma. And your rebirth can also be very much controlled if your karma is in order. And Buddhists pray and practice in order to inherit another lifetime where they can carry on their practice at a higher level, or better still, even inherit a pure land or the causal realm or the place of the perfected beings. So fear is inevitable. We all have to have fears, and it's normal and it's necessary. So let's talk about fear of death as well. You can read the quote yourself. But this is almost fear of an uncontrolled death. Almost none of us would go on a trip to outer Mongolia without making preparations, especially if we were going on our own. We would take a lot of time, probably take a year in preparing, but very few people prepare for death. And the Buddhists say that the most impactful meditation is the meditation on death. It makes the biggest imprint on the psyche. So we need to think about death, meditate on death. And if you look at people who've had near-death experiences, and for those that have morbid fears of death, there's a societies of near-death experiences. You can go and listen to these folks, and they never wanted to come back because it was so beautiful and wonderful on the other side. They actually had to be sent back because they had work to still do. Graf in the 1960s did work on LSD, and he found that a lot of people who experienced an LSD experience, in other words, other realities, they no longer fear death. There's also a lot of work now going on with psilocybin, which is in magic mushrooms, and they found that people with severe depressive anxiety disorders that were refractory do very well after psilocybin rituals, and that they often lose their fear of death. So there are ways you can do it. You can become like a bushman in a way that they experience the little death when they travel out of body in their trance dance. Many shamans have mastered death. Death is something we can all master if we want to, and we pay attention to it and we make some preparations. Then there's threat to health, to life, limb, organ, or function. Very, very fearful thing. Many of us feel we'd rather be dead than be disabled, especially in your last third of life or so, although that never works that way. So there's a lot of hope here, and I'm going to talk a bit about that because that's kind of part of my work. There are three main variables in healing, and healing is the same as transformation. There's the healer, and I'm talking about complicated diseases now, not just something simple, something that requires a team approach, of which the physician is just a part. So the healing team is responsible for invoking a placebo response. Placebo is the power of love to help, to heal, and to cure, not a nocebo effect, which is the power of fear to hurt, to harm, or even to kill. The patient, on the other hand, is responsible to his or her inner healer and do all things necessary in order to enhance the life force, the inner healer. The inner healer is a sacred part of the soul. It's made in the image of the divine. It has infinite potential, as we'll see in spontaneous remission of diseases. Everything is put in the right order. So they have to pay attention with meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, acupuncture, Reiki, whatever they need to do, whatever is necessary. To some extent, they have control over their place. They may not control the kind of insurance that they have. Obviously, if you can go off to the Mayo Clinic, you're going to be much better off. But they can pay attention to a toxic work environment and take a leave of absence, or a dysfunctional home relationship, and at least put that in order or do something about it, to the place they live in terms of maybe access to nature and so on. To the extent that the patient and the healing team can access the field, the power of the healing is going to be much more available and accessible, because there are factors in the field that we don't know about that can help us, including the creator and our guides and our ancestors. So if we look at this slide, some of you have seen it before. On the left side, we have eustress. We have stress, but it doesn't really bother us. On the right side, we have distress. And the important thing to recognize is that placebo and nocebo work directly on the belief system, which affects the inner healer directly. You know what's going on. You've been hexed by either the doctor with a prognosis, or by the office of the doctor, who've got a sort of a, they don't regard you in high esteem, that they're really not very pleasant to you. That's a nocebo response. You feel it, you know it, it's in your belief system. It goes directly to your inner healer. That has to be minimized. And then there's a field effect, which happens and occurs whether you know about it or not, or you believe in it or not. Distant healing, there have been many double-blind studies on distant healing. So when you take two groups of comparable patients, the one gets standard care, the other gets standard care, as well as distant healing from experienced healers. And this is the important thing. There's no placebo, because the groups don't know they're being healed. The results are so much better with the healing group that if you could bottle it into a pill, you'd be negligent for not dispensing it. Now, if distant healing is true, then distant hexing must also be true. And I know this to be true. I've had personal experience of it. But distant hexing is more powerful if it's combined with a nocebo effect, and if it's combined with shame or guilt. For instance, somebody with religious conviction might believe they have sinned and God is punishing them because of their sins. They're not going to get better. Or somebody in an indigenous society knows they've been hexed, and they have been hexed, and they have reason to be hexed because they screwed somebody over in business. That hex is going to be as powerful as a death sentence. These things don't apply much to us here, but they're important to know about, because sometimes we can help other people by informing them. So these are the healing outcomes, basically. I can't actually recognize the landscape in medicine today. Compared to things in the new millennium, there are diseases that I would never have expected to survive, never mind being in remission. Remission is not only possible now, it's probable. Relapse still occurs, but there's all kinds of therapies now to put you back in remission, including targeted therapy, immunotherapy. It's unbelievable what's going on. So there are miracles going on in Western medicine, but we have to remember the other variables as well. You still get fulminating progression and death where the diagnosis has been delayed or misdiagnosed, even in sophisticated societies. Clearly in third world societies, it's going to be much more common. Spontaneous remission I want to talk about because it's relevant to everything that I'm saying, not just to people who had deadly diseases that defied the best Western medicine had to offer and went away spontaneously. The 69 cases that are documented by Lourdes, by the Vatican Medical Commission, are not just the only ones. You can be sure there are lots of people, they're not anecdotal, who've gone to a shaman, a psychic healer, a qigong master, and they've been healed from terrible diseases, and they're just told that they're anecdotal by doctors. But it's good to know what the properties of these are, because they help us with everything. Everybody can be healed regardless. Not everybody can be cured, but many people are cured and they're not healed. So they continue with their dysfunctional lives and they live long enough to inherit something else, maybe another disease or another serious dysfunction. Now, spontaneous remission of disease in the 90s, there were 2 books put out by Noetic Sciences that I studied about the work done at Lourdes by the Vatican Medical Commission. They had documented these cases, they were real, they had all the data. And these were the factors that I gleaned out of the book. It was the will to live, a fighting spirit, having unfulfilled goals that they were determined to fulfill, trusting not only in themselves, but also in the medical team and all the extraneous people, alternative people that were helping them. The interesting thing was also a faith or a spiritual belief, not necessarily a religious belief like the Christians at Lourdes was really one of the most important things. And this often was just a sense of knowing. They just knew that they were going to be fine. They knew they were going to be all right. You can't fake that. It's just something you have or you don't have. The others you can work on. Love and a support system, very important. A loving family, a loving partner, even a loving pet, help, a support group, a community, a church, and so on. Making wise choices and perceiving the physician only as a partner and vice versa. The physician would support them in all their endeavors and not tell them this is all nonsense and don't waste your money, because that's a nocebo response on the patient's belief system. Many of them found meaning in their dilemma, in their disaster. Many of them said they would never have chosen to have the disease, but having had it, they knew that they were never the same. They were completely transformed. Their life changed. They'd gone on a hero or heroine's journey. The breast cancer patient who survived now is helping other breast cancer folks and so on. Those who had prior rites of passage obviously did better. If you've climbed Everest once, it's going to be better, easier the second time. They avoided stress at all costs, so they feared less. That was the biggest thing. Loved more and feared less. This is what got them through. So if you look at the fear of having no meaning, this is very important in contrast to the meaning we're talking about in spontaneous remission. Lawrence van der Post said, actually, he's a very interesting guy, because Lawrence van der Post was the current king's godfather, a South African guy who spent quite a lot of time, I think, with Prince Charles. And he said, once what you are living and what you are doing has for you meaning, it is irrelevant whether you are happy or unhappy, you are content, you are not alone in your spirit, you belong. So it's not as if you are bouncing off the walls with happiness and joy. Things actually get more difficult when you have meaning. You know, you have more challenges. The same with spiritual transformation. It doesn't get easier, it gets harder. But you have the sense of belonging that you're in the right zone. So when you look at people who have a lack of meaning, and the most powerful example are probably those who survived the Nazi death camps, as did Viktor Frankl. And he came out of there and he wrote a book, and man's quest for meaning. And he said, striving to find meaning in life is the primary, most powerful motivating and driving force in humans. So he found, and others have also found, that people who had unfulfilled goals, they had a child they wanted to see, or a loved one they wanted to see, or they helped others, they took their suffering and they made something useful out of it, or they wanted to write a book like Frankl did. Even folks like Mandela and Gandhi, who had insufferable pain and fear, they overcame it because they had a mission, they had a purpose. This was in contrast to the other people in the Nazi death camps who had, I like acronyms, a hopeless, helpless, head down attitude. They were anxious, apathetic, depressed, dejected, desperate, always in a state of despair, detached and resigned to their fate. Many of them killed themselves by throwing themselves against the electrified fences. So meaning is really important in terms of not only survival, but spiritual growth. So Thurman, who's a devout Buddhist, says, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and then go do that. What the world needs is people who have come alive. So Seligman, who was one of the founders of positive psychology and talks about well-being, which is also about meaning. He talks about meaning a lot. He says, find your core or signature strength and use them to serve something bigger than oneself. In other words, use them to help others. Auden said once, which I kind of like his quote, "We are here to help others. What on earth others are here for, I do not know." So Thurman is really saying what makes you come alive is going to be your core strength. So we're going to talk a bit about that in the warrior's journey. Look to your different warriors' journeys and see what maybe your core strength was that came out that you neglected along the way, that now you can volunteer. Often, don't even have to get paid for it, and find peace and, do like the Buddhists say, take the shit and make it into manure. That's not what they say, but that's my paraphrase. So I want to talk about the hero or the heroine's journey, which usually is to do with going through the deep, the dark, and the steep and the unknown. But I'm really talking more about self-realization and becoming, rather than the hero's journey that you know about, more about what the Upanishads say. May the hero awaken from forgetfulness. May the hero awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. We know much more than we think we know, and we are much more than we believe ourselves to be. And this is a result of what the Buddhists call our store consciousness, the memory bank that has to do with our past lives. All of you, I'm sure, are old souls. You wouldn't be listening to this unless you were. And we have deep impressions from our cellular memory. In a way, it's kind of like epigenetics, but it's not genetic, it's cellular, where we have had experiences before. We know a lot of stuff, but we've had to forget it when we come into the new life. But they can be recognized as deja vu. And when you hear some of these spiritual truths, they seem familiar to you. You may even get goosebumps in a sense that you've been here before. So we need to awaken from forgetfulness and transcend anxiety and sorrow, especially this audience, because there's a lot of stuff we know. We just have to remember it and translate it into a spiritual hero's journey, remembering our warriors' journeys. Remember that the warrior's journey fulfills the two of the three stages I'm going to talk about, the separation and the threshold, but not the incorporation. Basically, the warrior takes the grail, the core strength, the signature strength, the archetype, and keeps it for him or herself, or for the family, or for the corporation. The hero gives it away. That includes the spiritual hero. When you connect with self, the big self, you start to give away more than you ever gave away before. So first you have to go through the separation phase, and this is very fearful. You're going to be fearful, but you're no longer satisfied with yourself. There's a yearning for the extraordinary. You prepare to take your boat into the open oceans where you don't know what's going to happen. Often people are going to say, don't do it. It's stupid. What's your problem? You've got a good life, but you do it anyway. So you leave the safe harbor. Then you go through the threshold, and the cave you fear to enter are the caves of your physical fears, in a sense, the deep, the dark, the steep. But there's also the meeting of the shadow that Jung talks about, our own inner demons, our shadow, our monkey mind, our ego, and how we're going to overcome those. So when you go through the threshold, you come back with a grail, or it might not be the grail. You come back with a feeling of what your core strength is. And it might just be an aha experience, and you come back and incorporate and either do things differently. The way you might use the same thing you're doing now because it's good for you, but you do it differently. Or alternatively, you change what you're doing. And if you can't change what you're doing without leaving your day job, you keep your day job and you volunteer it. So the incorporation phase and all these phases there's fear, because you are in fear now of not incorporating. And that's going to be a pebble of your regret if you don't incorporate. A lot of the people that I took on inward bound journeys, I think a lot of them went back. They experienced the fall. Very important to have an ongoing spiritual practice, which includes getting as much knowledge as you can, or we're all going to fall. And we'll talk about that. Or do what Campbell says, hold to your vision, be true to the myth that you have. And the myth may not be anything amazing. It may be that core strength you were given by the Creator that nobody else can do. We also have to be aware of the Peter principle, which says we rise to the level of our own incompetence. So in other words, cream rises to the top and then it goes sour. So I'll give you just an example of, say, Jane, who's a teacher at a college. She's a brilliant teacher. Students love her. They can't wait for class to happen. Her colleagues love her. The principal loves her. The board loves her. Then the board gets together and the principal is going to retire or the dean's going to retire. And the board says, Jane is so amazing. We really need to promote her. I'm scared we're going to lose her. Why don't we make her dean or principal? And they say, great idea. They go to Jane. They say, here you go, Jane. And meanwhile, she's got a happy life. She's got a happy spouse. She's got happy children. And they say, look, we want you to be the principal and you'll have a great salary. You'll have a fantastic retirement plan. You'll have better health care, as will your kids and your family. You'll have your own office and your own budget, your own parking space. What do you say? So basically, Jane gets bought out of her lane. She has to leave her lane. She's part of the Peter principle. She turns out to be an okay, maybe a mediocre administrator, and she's left what her core strength was. Even though she got less money, even though she got less kudos, she was true to herself, or she should have been true to herself. So we have to be very careful of the Peter principle. Otherwise, it's going to happen to us as we get too good at what we do. Then there's threat to the ego self, and I'm not going to talk about that much. We need to transcend persona, ego, what's called self-cherishing for self-transformation. But if we have fear from shame, it's going to get in the way. So shame is the swampland of the soul, Jung said. Shame is a crippling emotional force, and it's often associated with humiliation. It's a major threat to one's ego. The ego can be completely shattered with shame. Now, we all have things that we regret that we did, or we could have done better, or we should have done, or we didn't do at all, or what was done to us and we didn't stand up for ourselves. That's regret, remorse, and sometimes guilt, the lesser shades of guilt. And those are all correctable. You can always make corrective action. But shame is not so easy to correct and usually comes out of severe self-abuse or out of abuse from others. And I'm not going to go into that because otherwise I'm getting out of my lane. But let's talk a little bit about it because it's very common. If you're interested, you can go online and look at Brene Brown's work on shame. She says 60% of Americans are suffering from some sort of shame. So toxic shame means a broken self, a broken ego, little self, not the higher self. The higher self is intact. It's pure. It's always pure. Guilt can lead to shame, and severe guilt can lead to shame. But in guilt, the self can still be intact. For instance, guilt can be reconciled with self-forgiveness or with the forgiveness of others, or by asking forgiveness of others, and then you can be cleaned. The only way out of it is through it. You have to own it, you have to become it, and then you have to transform it. If we do not transform our pain, we will assuredly transmit it. The pain will turn inwards, the fear will turn inwards to self-abuse, to abuse of others with anger, hatred, malice, and self-abuse with maybe suicidal ideations or self-mutilation and so on. So shame can be a very, very powerful factor. In other words, we have to come out of hiding and expose ourselves. So in reality, we all screw up. To err is human, to forgive divine. The yogis say the self-condemnation, which is what happens with shame, strengthens guilt, which is one of the single biggest impediments on the way to self-realization, on the way to becoming. It puts the brain in lockdown mode. You're in monkey mind the whole time, like we talked about, and nothing creative will happen there. It puts you in a shame spiral. So vulnerability is courage. To come out is courageous. The courage to be imperfect causes compassion and forgiveness. Some people may not think so, but 90% of people are going to admire you for doing it. and they might start to do it themselves. Look at Oprah, famous personality who came out with her sexual abuse. Not getting stuck in damaging self-talk and self-blame is really important. Treating oneself as a good friend and shifting the blame to where it belongs. Often it's not your fault. And the ancestors say, release yourself from what you're not accountable for. Of course, this kind of shame, which can lead to soul loss and even soul sickness, or soul sickness and even soul loss, is going to need a lot of different kinds of methods of treatment and healing. But the important thing to remember is there's no catastrophe, there's no crisis that cannot be turned into an opportunity. It's not what happens to us, it's what we do with it. And this can be a huge catalyst for growth. So it's often that those who have come out of the bottom of the barrel and they rise out of the bottom like a phoenix coming out of the ashes are going to be incredibly spiritually powerful. And are looked on very favorably from the supernal realms because the ancestors, the guides, the Great Spirit admires them for getting out of the bottom of the barrel, as opposed to many of us who haven't been down there and we don't know what it's like. So I'm going to talk about fear of isolation, and Mother Teresa said it very well. You can read it yourself. And this probably came out of her experience in India. There might have been 10 people sharing a room, sharing the little bit of food they had, but they had each other. They were not lonely. They were not alone. And this is really important. My experience with the Bushmen, especially in 1987, I went to the Kalahari, a very austere desert where there isn't even water. These guys were happy. They were hunter-gatherers. They somehow eked out a survival existence. They had each other. They had a profound sense of spirituality. They were more happy than I was with all the stuff that I had, and because they had each other. This is very similar to the African, the Bantu idea of Ubuntu, which says you are a person only through other persons, by Bishop Tutu. And this is really important. So a lot of people have talked about this. Thich Nhat Hanh says we all inter-are. The ancestors say we're all one, but they're not the same. We all go back, all of us, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Hiroshi said the fundamental delusion of humanity to suppose I'm here and you are out there. So I believe, quite honestly, that isolation is more prevalent in the United States because of the cowboy self-reliance, self-individualism mentality. This I'm quoting somebody else, a psychologist who felt that reliance on others, and he was talking more about the Americans, implies dependency and debt, and people do not want to be in debt to anybody except maybe to the bank here. So this is a really important thing, to the extent that I found that Americans are incredibly helpful if the people are in dire straits. But other than that, they're scared to be too helpful because they're not sure they're intruding on this person's individuality. I think Paul Simon said it well in his song, I am a rock, I am an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. That's relevant to shame as well, and also to this incredible individuality that we have. And, I remember even as a kid that we admired the cowboy movies in South Africa because here was the Lone Ranger going off on his horse, just with his 6-gun and his rifle and his bedroll and a bit of food, and he could go out there and be happy. Well, he didn't look so happy, actually, and unlike everybody else. And in reality, that is anathema to any indigenous people. Everybody, the tribal Africans, the Bushmen, the Native Americans, the Amazonian Indians, they all live in community. They don't try and survive alone. It's almost impossible to in some of those austere environments. So this is something I think that's very important, and it may have a lot to do with the way things are going on social media, appealing to the shadow side of folks who have no life, they have no friends, the only people they relate to are online, and it maybe makes them feel good to be a zealot for a cause, even though they're sort of tuned into fake news. They believe it's true, so what can you do? Scary stuff. Then there's fear and threat to the soul or the higher self. This is soul loss. Now, soul loss can come from any of the things I've been talking about. It's more likely to be in most of us a soul sickness. I think at the moment we all have a little bit of soul sickness. I'm going to talk about that right at the end because of what's going on the planet. That's remediable. Soul loss is not so easy to fix. So let's just look a little bit at soul sickness or loss. And the ancestors quote David the psalmist, who said, "From the sound of my sighing, from the sound of my equanimity, my peace, my harmony, my balance," probably when he was a shepherd tending his sheep in pure wilderness, communing with God, getting his songs and making his psalms. "From the sound of my sighing, as my essence, that's my soul, fused onto my flesh, that's my body. The soul and the body should be as one. When the body starts to misbehave because of overwhelming sentient pleasures or whatever abuse, the soul starts to separate from the body. And if it's soul sickness, it can be easily brought back. We'll talk about that today. When it's soul loss, then it's pretty much gone. It's still redeemable. It's going to be much more difficult. So severe abuse can be a problem for soul. The black is usually in soul loss, the red more to do with soul sickness. Severe abuse, these crazy cults, including ISIS, Boko Haram, who, pump teenagers up on drugs, and then they get them to kill their mother. And after that, they have them because they have so much shame, so self-humiliation, they can do anything they want. The same is true for these gangs, Mexican gangs. The initiation process is go out and kill some innocent bystander. And when you've killed somebody, pretty much your soul is going to be gone. The movies where the hitman or even the special forces will say, it's always hard to kill the first one, but after that, it's easy. Why? Because the soul pretty much checks out after those kind of abuses, those kind of violent things. So satanic cults and those kind of things can be very bad. Not only that, but once you've got soul loss, you can become possessed by other forces which are not in your control, but can control you even more strongly. Then there's trauma, violence, war, especially people who have got PTSD. They almost long to go back because they had companionship and they felt better when they were in the situation. When they come home, they feel totally alone. Addictions, of course, burnout, sex, drugs, rock and roll, severe illnesses, spiritual diseases, which we're going to talk about, and severe illnesses, all relating often to shame. Soul loss can be an account of severe shame. So now I want to talk about the unknown, the occult, the religious, and the superstitious. We know about the religious folks who've been brought up in the religious community, and they feel because they've been indoctrinated that they've sinned, and this is not the way God works, not the way the spirit world works. The karma is what takes care of everything. You don't get sick because of your karma. You don't, you don't have to worry about any of those things. So I want to talk about some of the things I learned from the Sangomas, and all of which can be treated, and all of which are unknown to Western medicine and psychotherapy. So it's really important to know these things, even if they don't involve you, especially if you're a healer or a psychotherapist, or maybe they do affect you. So these are diseases which usually can even cause some disease in a sense. And often that somebody who is sick and African in South Africa will go to a doctor, and the doctor will say there's nothing wrong with you. And then, of course, he goes to see a Sangoma, and the Sangoma will diagnose one of these illnesses or diseases. The treatment of this has to be shamanic. It cannot be anything else. So withdrawal of your spirit guides. When I first went to get initiated in Swaziland, my Zulu mentor, excuse me, my Zulu mentor, the first thing he said to me, you Westerners have lost the way. You don't even know who your ancestors were. Some of you don't pay any attention to them. You are like papers blowing in the wind, unsupported in life. Now, I'm talking about the ones that are not toxic, that didn't do any kinds of abuse. I'm talking about the ones that loved you and that cared for you and your guides as well, because we have guides as well as ancestors. So you are unprotected in life, like papers blowing in the wind. These are often diseases of omission, not commission. Because you're unprotected, things happen to you that wouldn't happen to you if you were protected. You know, an accident or something happened to you, or getting on the plane when you had a dream to say, you should have had a dream to say, don't get on the plane. Those are diseases or problems or issues to do with omission of your guides. We're going to talk about that at the end of the year. Then there's spiritual intrusions. I could give a whole talk on any one of these, but the spiritual intrusions, simplistically speaking, are either earthbound spirits or intrusive spirits. Earthbound spirits, the commonest one is a little old lady who had a confused, traumatic, unexpected death in her home, and is now wandering the hallways, wondering why the other strange people in her house, maybe not even knowing she's dead. The spiritual intrusions are usually your ancestors who have wronged you and are seeking forgiveness. The only way they can get relief from their karmic blemish is by being forgiven. So this is always best done before death, but it can be done after death, but you're going to have to find somebody with some kind of shamanic-like expertise. So they can cause spiritual intrusions, and all of these things, ritual impurity, witchcraft, sorcery, can cause dis-ease, which can be bad luck. You tend to fight with other people and you don't know why you're fighting. You think it's something wrong with them. Meanwhile, it's something going on around you. They look at you and you have trouble with relationships because they see there's sort of something not right. You have bad luck. You're more accident prone. You get headaches, you get anxiety, you get depression, you get neck aches and very weird somatic symptoms. You maybe seek medical attention. They'd say there's nothing wrong with you, where there is something wrong with you. All of these things, to a lesser or greater extent, can cause some of these maladies, including the spiritual intrusions. Ritual impurity or energetic pollution is the spiritual part of it has gone, but there's an energetic imprint from something toxic that happened in the past. So, for instance, there's certain objects, you know, often I talk to people who've got demonic objects in their homes, you know, like a mask that they bought in Africa that's old, that might have been used by a witch, and their home might be polluted on the divination. Or alternatively, they're collecting military apparel like weapons from the Civil War or the Second World War. You don't know what gun, how many people that gun shot, or a samurai sword, you know, if that murdered somebody. So these things carry energy. They're best not collected. They cause energetic pollution. Then there are trips to places where you shouldn't be going. An example would be Auschwitz. There are people who are so sensitive they wouldn't even think of going there. But there are others that go there that pick up a lot of ritual impurity, or even may pick up earthbound spirits that might tack onto somebody with a light aura. So, but I'm talking more about ritual impurity. If you've been sick, you know, you've been in the ICU, the hospital, the rehab for a long time, you might be ritually impure. You might need a detox. You might need to go on a retreat. It doesn't have to be spiritual, or that would be spiritual in terms of what you need for yourself. Journeys can be ritually impure. I remember my teacher would never allow me to pick up a hitchhiker, because he said, you don't know who that person is. Maybe it's a witch. Maybe it's somebody who's killed somebody. You don't want that impurity in your automobile. So that was kind of interesting to me. It wasn't so much about the risk of getting killed. It was more to do with an energetic thing. Then the things that don't apply to us, but they maybe should, because we're so insensitized to everything, to 5G, to radon, to all the electronic stuff going on around us, to GMO foods and all the rest of it. We don't feel those things, but they affect us anyway. But blood carries the life force, and blood is an impure substance. When you are treating intrusive spirits, the medicines that are used in Africa are red because you're trying to get rid of the bad blood. But if you look at the Creator, allowed the Hebrews to eat certain animals that were more pure than others. I'm sure the Creator would have preferred us to be vegetarians. But nevertheless, if you had to eat this animal, you had to exsanguinate it by cutting its jugular vein, and then actually get rid of all the blood by putting salt on the meat and taking out all the blood from the meat. Satanic cults are using blood for the opposite of, for demonic purposes. And so are witches and so on. So there's power in blood, and Native Americans, religious Jews, and even tribal Africans will not sleep with their partner on the menstrual cycle. I remember asking a Sangoma, why was this? I sort of knew this, but I wanted his answer. He said, a woman on her moon is much too powerful for a man. That energy can really be too much for him. And sometimes somebody who's done that will go to a Sangoma to get medicine, often it'll be read to help them. All of this sounds very strange, but it's real. Then death is another one. Death, tending to a dead body is an admirable thing to do. But in the Leviticus, if you look there in Leviticus, you'll see that a Hebrew person who had attended a dead body was not allowed back into the community until they'd purified themselves. On several occasions, I went to see a Sangoma to consult with their bones, only to be told she's gone to officiate at a funeral. Come back tomorrow, she won't touch her bones until she's cleansed herself. These things don't apply to most of us, but they're worth knowing, because sometimes they do. The ancestors are very big on Tonglen being a ritual impurity. This is the Buddhist practice, again commendable, of breathing in the pain and suffering and hardship of others, converting into white light and then breathing it back to the sufferers. Now, this might be okay if you're a bodhisattva, but not if you, like me or somebody else, because we don't have that kind of a power. Much better to breathe in white light of the universe and send it out to those that are suffering, not to breathe in their suffering. We have enough of our own these days anyway. Witchcraft or sorcery are alive and well. I'm talking about the dark side of witchcraft, not Wicca. And they are prevalent everywhere you go, especially in indigenous societies where they don't have lawyers and people get wronged and they want their wrong righted, and the witches help them. The witch has a heart of envy. They don't want you to have what you have, and they want to take from you what you've got, and they want to help other people do this and make money out of it. So there's an interesting commandment, you could say, which says, don't be jealous, don't covet your neighbor or anything belonging to your neighbor, because a covetous heart, an envious heart, leads to witchcraft, leads to the evil eye, the evil tongue, the evil inclination. And those, especially if they're allowed to conscript dark forces, trickster energy, by giving them permission to help them, they can be quite powerful, even though you don't think you're doing harm. If you're a witch, you're a professional. You've actually conscripted these forces, which I sometimes call the spiritual mafia. But there's no nocebo that can't be rectified by placebo. There's no hex that can't be dehexed. So one doesn't have to worry about it, but it's worth knowing some of these things. So I'm going to sort of tail down now and just summarize this saying: no matter how you stir a pot of filth, in other words, a pot of fear, it's always a pot of fear. Better to let the pot be and string pearls for the sake of heaven. So what about death? We can educate ourselves, we can meditate on death, we can talk to people who've had near-death experiences. For those who have morbid fears, you might even seek out somebody who you can be trusted, who might take you through an experience with something gentle like psilocybin, where you can lose the fear of death. Ill health, the good news is remember the field, remember the inner healer, remember placebo, remember the opposite, remember to optimize place, remember that today especially miracles are there from Western medicine. It's incredible what's going on. Most people are going to outlive their disease these days. Fear of taking a leap of faith is even more difficult now because things are so strange. You don't want to go to any exotic place anymore because people are fearful of what can happen. I used to not worry where I went. I would go to third world countries and I would say, I can always get out of bad situations. Now, no, you can't get out of bad situations. They'll kill you, or they'll kidnap you, or they'll, do do bad things to you. So this has to do with meaning. And I think the thing we can do here is maybe take another hero's journey. It doesn't have to be to some exotic place. It can be a local retreat. It can be a Zen retreat. It could be going to Islin or Tassajara or one of those places. Go on a hero's journey, which is a spiritual one, and also scrutinize your previous warrior's journeys. Many of them could have been hero's journeys. My hero's journey started with medicine. I was in the hero archetype. By the time I was done, I was in the warrior archetype. I had to go back to find the healer archetype in myself and become a Sangoma to rediscover myself. And that came really out of a hero's journey of really not liking who I was, not happy who I was, not happy with what Western medicine has to offer, and trying to find a place in it. But look at your old warriors' journeys, because they might have been turned into heroes' journeys. I'm not going to talk much about shame and humiliation, but those can be rectified. Self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others is key. Isolation, take your suffering and make something useful out of it. So find a group where you can either help other people or animals. And some of us don't like the talking beings. You can focus on the still beings on the planet, or on the growing beings, or on the wild or domestic beings. There are any kind of things we can do to help, depending on what your proclivity is. So the other thing is, you can go on a search for the true self, the higher self. You can join a Buddhist community. You can go and join anybody that's like-minded, who's on some sort of spiritual quest, and find company. Soul sickness is easy to rectify, because pretty much we're talking about the causes of it. Soul loss is going to need special treatment, probably going to be somebody very enlightened who can help somebody and redeem them. But it is possible. Remember that the Christian value, Jesus died for our sins, is that everybody can be redeemed. Doesn't matter how bad you've done, you can be redeemed. So it's always possible. As far as the occult is concerned, it's good to know about these things, and to at least not to disbelieve in them. You don't have to believe in them. You don't have to have anything to do with them. Enjoy them with the movies, but they are real. And if you're working in the healing realms, then you really need to be more aware of them, because there may be people who need this kind of help that you cannot help. So there's treatment for any one of these things. And then don't forget to fear complacency and embrace the unknown, because that's part of the hero's journey. Fear the known and embrace the unknown. I want to just look at what's going on now on the planet, because in reality, we all have an element of soul sickness, PTSD, anxiety, depression, because of what's going on. I usually last about an hour with my voice. So we've got climate change. The biggest thing is the water. You know, they say people fight over oil, but they kill for water. You know, we either got too much or we got too little. The river, the Colorado is drying up. The dams are drying up. I don't know what California is going to do if they don't have rains, and they better do something, because things are pretty desperate. So we have climate change. We have viruses, not only COVID now, but, you know, we have the expectation of another pandemic coming. They don't say if, it's only going to say when. All of this is because of the earth, what we've done to the earth. It's all in imbalance. We have war. We have these crazy people, these autocrats. We now have a revival of the far right, you know, the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacists. They're not just in America, they're all over the place. Anti-Semitism, anti-Muslimism, anti-everythingism. So these are things that are working on us, whether we know about it or not, or we think we know about it or not. It's like the frog is put in warm water, and slowly the water temperature has sort of gone up and up until the frog eventually boils. It's getting that way for us. So in a sense, we are encountering the deep, the dark, and the steep, the threat to life, limb, organ, or function. All these things are out there. You know, you travel, you have to go through the hassle now of flying. Firstly, you're going to have a delayed flight. Then you have to encounter, you know, the security, the COVID restrictions, the masks, and all the rest of it. It's just hardly worth the trouble. the unknown and the known. A lot of the stuff we don't know about. We're not sure what's going to happen. Even the experts don't exactly know what's going on with COVID or long COVID, or even with the vaccinations. People are getting side effects from the vaccinations. Religious, superstitious, and the occult. These are the far right people, the fake newsers, the people who are, buying into another reality that are affecting us. And then, of course, the ego self. But all of these can be remedied. Spiritual practice is the key thing, or gratitude practice. They found that gratitude is really very, very powerful spiritual practice. Somebody said ingratitude is really unforgivable, because we stand on the shoulders of all the people who went before us. No matter how bad it is, it's worse for many other people. And it was worse, many, many years ago. So even as bad as things are, they could be a lot worse. I remember somebody saying, so I said to myself, things could get worse, and they got worse. That's the way it feels now. Practice random acts of kindness. That's also, I think, to do with recycle, even if it doesn't really make much of a difference. It makes us feel better. If you see somebody who's homeless or begging, don't think about, oh, well, you're just going to go and buy alcohol or drugs. That's his problem. Your problem, I guess, your challenge is to, just give him something. If they're outside of Trader Joe's here in, California, you can buy them some food. Go back to nature. Nature is the ultimate healer, and pay attention to self-care. Don't watch too much TV. Don't watch toxic movies. Laugh a lot. Watch funny movies. If you want to stay informed, watch the comedians. So with that, I think I'm going to just take pause. We'll take the questions at the end. There are two songs I want to play, because we do have time, and then we'll have at least more than half an hour for questions. And when it comes to that, put your questions in the chat box. If I can't see all of you, it's nice to have Trevor who can sort of sort them out, because sometimes I can't see everybody who's raising their hand or whatever. Put your questions in the chat box and we'll address them. But I think now is the time to just perseverate and meditate actively on the things that have come up, and which are your weak spots or our weak spots. We all have our fears. What are the ones we need to take care of? Is it fear of death? Is it fear of taking a leap of faith? How am I going to do that? You can do a meditation, an active imagination on that, using the music to propel you. So here we go.
This life, who made this life? You make this life, you made this life. What made your life? Fear or love? Love or fear? Fear or love? Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze. Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze. has many faces, is a catalyst for growth. There is no transformation without conflict. To be totally fearless is foolish. Courage is to act in the face of fear. How do you know where fear lies? Your heart tells you so. How do you know where fear lies? Your heart tells you so. Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze. Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze. There are only two feelings, love and fear. Each have their light and dark side. No fear means that no courage is needed. Fear is part of the hero's journey. Survival's narrow mind is a slave to fear. Spacious mind accepts and copes, relegating fear to that of useful servant, never master. Fear is a magician, conjuring up images that can become our reality, directing and controlling actions and decisions, and our way of life. Who made this life? Who made this life? You make this life. You made this life. What made your life? Fear or love? Love or fear? Fear or love? Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze. Hold tight, but hang loose, like boughs in the breeze, like boughs in the breeze.
the end of the day, go back to nature.
I rise today through the grace of heaven, the warmth of the sun, the radiance of moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning. I rise today through the grace of heaven, the warmth of the sun, the radiance of moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning. Lightness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth and rock. Lightness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth and rock. Lightness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth and rock. Lightness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth and rock. Deep peace of the running water to you, deep peace of the flowing air, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars. Deep peace of the running water to you, deep peace of the flowing air, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars. I rise today through the grace of heaven, the warmth of the sun, the radiance of moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning.
Okay, well, you can slowly come back. And then you return to yourself. Any questions?
Sonia had asked earlier, right at the beginning, with the de-stress and eustress. So she wanted to know what eustress was.
Eustress is good stress, like euphoria. It's good stress. It's like taking the stress and not really letting it bother you, but just converting it and dealing with it and not worrying about it, so that something comes your way, you have peace and equanimity. I guess an example is, before I started yoga, I was often in distress. And my business manager used to kick me out of the office at 4 o'clock every afternoon so I could get into eustress, because she liked me better in eustress than distress. So that's what eustress is about. You come out of yoga and things don't bother you. Somebody shouts at you in the traffic or hoots, don't care about it. You just a what me worry kind of attitude. That's eustress.
Okay, and then Lorian had a question. Maybe you want to read it in the chat, or Lorian, maybe you want to come online and ask it. It's about open dialogue.
What do you think about open dialogue? Have you come across it, David? No, I don't know what it means. If you're talking about on Zoom, I don't think it can work, but maybe tell us what you mean.
Hi, David. I guess I was thinking of because I can't remember why I asked the question. Now, there's something that you said, but it's a way of integrating different perspectives, I suppose, in mental health and, you know, the spiritual with the scientific within medical, especially mental health care. Never mind.
No, I think it's a good statement. I think that's the point the ancestors are trying to make here is open dialogue. You know, they don't want anybody to have their own point of view. So, instance, I bring a lot of other traditions in that I've had a little bit of experience with, because everybody's got truth. And the allopathic is fantastic. You know, medicine, modern medicine is a miracle, but you need the non-allopathic. So I think you're stating exactly what the ancestors would want. Is they want an open dialogue here, because nobody has the answer. Everybody has something to offer. And in mental health, the main thing that I've learned from mental health is shamanism often does a lot of things that psychotherapy cannot do. You know,
Yes.
It just, you know, because when you tap into what's called non-local information, that's information not localized in space and time, then you can offer a completely different perspective of a disease, because what may be, you know, a really bad headache might be an intrusive spirit that needs to be resolved in terms of forgiveness. So open dialogue is great. And, you know, I don't like to talk about any one particular thing. The ancestors' wisdoms are all generic. They're not coming from a Christian point of view or Buddhist point of view or any other point of view. The ancestors are mainly Celtic and Kabbalistic and African, and they're not interested in, you know, putting a label on it so everybody can listen to it. I think maybe that's what you're talking about. So we need much more open dialogue now. And, you know, doctors should be talking to shamans. They don't, the reality is. I actually once was invited to give a talk on shamanism to the, you know, to the medical society here. And even the guy who invited me said, you know, the California Medical Association wants us to be more liberal. So I'm asking you to talk, but I don't believe in anything you're going to say. And then I was actually attacked by somebody who said to me, I can't believe you're actually talking about this stuff here. It's a disgrace. The fact is he actually sort of screwed himself up because people like to talk, and they sort of started to think he was a bit out of line. So yeah, open dialogue is not always comfortable, but it's necessary, because sometimes you have to push people's buttons and to get them to pay attention. And I think it's a very valid question. Any others?
Hey, Dave, this is Nancy.
Hey, Nancy, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Dave, the subtitle of your talk today was Choose Love, Use Fear. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. Fear, you need tension for perfection. You need conflict for growth. You know, we talked about the more extreme forms of conflict of fear today. But if we submit to fear, then we are negating love. There are only those two vibrations. The one makes you feel good, the other one makes you feel bad. The one gives you distress, the other one gives you eustress. So, in other words, use the fear when it comes along as a catalyst for growth. But the only way to do that is by getting out of monkey mind with spiritual practice. You can read all the self-help books you want, and you'll know a lot. but you won't be able to do anything about it until you do the spiritual practice. Let's take a sip. And I think the thing to not worry about is that people think about spiritual meditation. Well, I don't meditate, quite honestly. It never worked for me. I have to use a sensory meditation, something that has to do with my body. And some people have to do that. So meditation might be doing pottery, but just doing it for its own sake, without any objective mind. You're not interested in what people think about it. It's more meditation. It doesn't have an agenda. That's a spiritual practice. It might be just playing your guitar for the sake of the music. It might be walking on the beach. A lot of us don't do well. We don't, I know frequently when I do a divination, it says your spiritual practice is lacking. And they're saying, well, I don't know why, because I meditate. Well, it may not be enough for you. You're not actually able to get out of the spaces you're in. And the ancestors are very much in favor of a sensory practice. That's why I like yoga. I like hiking, and because it's sensory, I commune with nature, and I get downloads from my guides, when I'm sort of in an alpha state of consciousness. So when I do yoga, I'm in eustress. When I don't do yoga for a week, I'm often in distress. So I can choose to not do yoga and be in distress, or do it and be in eustress. So it always revolves around not only using some sort of method of going inwards, but then that's the only way it's going to help you to get through the stressful situations. So in terms of what I was talking about with all the craziness going around us, we have to do self-care somehow. We have to find some way to change our vibration, get out of monkey mind into spacious mind, and use the stress to good effect. I'll give you an example. Last week, the talk was an absolute disaster. The sound doesn't work. We spent days trying to make sure that everything worked. That never happened. Excuse me. And that's why we're having this talk now. So what I often do is I take something where I have a bad memory of something, and I change the memory of it. This is an important thing to do. So I thought, great, this is what happened. The thing bombed. So I thought, I'll do this talk today. It'll be free. No one has to register. Those who weren't there, they're very welcome. I don't, always like not having to charge anyway, but the school needs the money. And those who didn't, like you, Nancy, didn't get to hear it, get to hear it. And you take the shit, you make into manure. Don't let the tricksters get you. Often this is trickster stuff that's going on. The trickster stuff that went on that day is that I thought it was the fan was the problem, but it was hot as hell. And I said, I'm going to switch off the fan. And somebody said, no, don't do that. So I against my better judgment, I didn't. Otherwise, the thing wouldn't have bombed. So I'm sure that tricksters have a part in it. The technology has a part in it. But you've got to take the experience whenever, it's like when you fall off your horse, you don't just remember that, you get back on your horse or your bicycle or whatever. There's a guy called Kahneman who says that the last thing that happens to you is what you're going to remember. You should convert the thing that causes you the distress into something that causes you stress. So today, I was in distress a week ago. Today, I'm in eustress. Got a lot of nice folks tuning in. We're having fun. Giving the talk, even though I'm giving it twice, it doesn't matter to me. I change the conversation. I think that's the main thing. When you fall off the horse, get back up on the horse by doing something else, or change it into something. Take the shit and change it into some other shape of something that makes you happy. I think it's important now to do that because things are really not that good. We're in an existential crisis. We don't really know what's going to happen. So a lot of people are in distress. I know a lot of my patients that come into the office, they're completely spun. They got PTSD from the floods and the fires, and then it was COVID. And now, some of them have got shingles after the vaccination. It's like one thing after another. And now there's Russia and all the rest of it. We've got to do something about it. And I think it starts with some form of going inwards. and taking the fear, because fear is necessary. And like I said, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Dave.
Okay.
I was also thinking of it in terms of using fear. Like, fear is good for us if it keeps us away from dangerous situations. You know, it could save our life. I was just kind of thinking of it like that. And thank you for elaborating on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, that's a very important thing too. That's where fear is really important, keeping us safe. So we shouldn't go towards fear. You know, we shouldn't try base jumping, because that is lunacy unless you're a supreme athlete and you have a different anatomy in terms of your amygdala. You're going to crash and burn because you're out of your lane. So yes, both are true. Absolutely. Fear is a good thing, keeps you safe, but also sometimes you have to go through the fear and do it anyway, take a leap of faith in spite of the fear. So the two things, there's a problem in deciding which one is which. Sometimes you take a leap of faith, it's the wrong leap and you break your leg. So that's not a good thing. So don't go towards the fear, but if fear comes your way, then use it as a catalyst, but don't look for it. That was the thing that I was talking about with the outward bound thing. In a sense, they were contriving fear for self-mastery and self-worth, for self-actualization of the little self. Really important stuff. I think that's important. But everybody here has a certain degree of self-mastery, self-actualization. We don't have to contrive fear anymore. We don't have to go towards it. I think when we're growing, we sometimes have to take risks to help ourselves know, whether we're worthy or not. But sometimes we come short, but you still learn. You still learn. Anybody else? Trevor, anyone that I'm not noticing?
No, I don't see anybody, but it did occur to me with the fear and what Nancy was saying. I feel it's because you mentioned complacency, and that's a challenge because it's the comfort zone, and unless we are aware of those things that can hurt us, to keep ourselves just not in that sort of like in neutral, where we're still applying ourselves and where we take things for granted, where we're so used to things, but just to be aware somebody moved something and we're not used to, and all of a sudden we take a fall down the steps because something wasn't there that we would always naturally subconsciously touch, and all of a sudden it's not there and we lost our rhythm, kind of a thing. So those type of things I think are that, to me, this is what I'm doing in my life right now, because I'm finding there's so much has changed and so much has moved around that I have to use the fear. Is that still there? I'm, sort of like verify just to check, but also then do that leap of faith and just keep walking, but be aware that it's possible that all of a sudden there's going to be a big hole in front of me. And then sort of not I just use that knowing that things are very delicate and I'm walking a very narrow line right now, and that's a little bit of a fear, and then it comes out and then I'm in that another place after for a moment. But it's just when I'm feeling a little vulnerable, I feel that's what maybe Nancy's alluding to and what you're saying with the fear. I'm just reminding myself, I'm putting a little bit of fear in myself just to keep myself in check, my ego in check, otherwise I feel, just keep walking and all of a sudden I take a fall.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Just elaborating on what Nancy said. Yeah, it's interesting because taking the fall, that's one of the things I can say about the ancestor practice, the spiritual practice, getting your guides on your side, whether you know about them, you don't hear them, you don't feel them, you don't see them, but they're there. They can help you prevent that trick, in a way. suddenly they'll say, look there, like you're saying, you're going to trip and fall, metaphorically or otherwise, and then you don't. Or you just intuitively are driving a certain way, and then suddenly, for whatever reason, you slow down and another car just veers right in front of you and you would have smashed. Those are things that we think we take, oh, well, you think, oh, well, that's lucky. I lucked out there. I could have really, if I hadn't slowed down, I would have really crashed. But in reality, something out there is telling you in your head, they say, slow down right now. And then you don't hear it, but you do it. And, that's one of the benefits of what I was saying. Don't be a paper blowing in the wind without support from the spiritual world, because they can guide your life in those little areas where we do trip up. We're not that good. We do that all the time. Exactly what you're saying. But sometimes those things, when you've got support and you're connected and you're not neglectful, you've got a, my favorite quote is, trust in God and the ancestors, but tie your camel. You can't be, silly about it. But every now and then you can be rescued, and it happens to me often. And I think, oh my gosh, something really could have happened. I was driving to Solvang a week or two ago, and some guy ran out in front of the car. I was doing about 65 miles an hour. And I think if I hadn't slowed down a little bit before that, I would have hit him. Some homeless guy, probably thinking I was going to, get injured and then go to the hospital for free. But then he suddenly realized that he's probably going to die. So he ran out of the way really quickly. But that was touch and go. So those things happen, but they happen less frequently if you are helped from the other side and you don't know that you're being helped, but often you are.
Yeah, and I think that comes from that appreciative state, that being thankful for, grateful for what is and acknowledging everything and appreciating it.
Yeah, gratitude. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think there will be a talk in October on destiny and the hero's journey, which is really a key talk. And then later in the year, in November, dreams and how ancestors script us. So we'll talk quite a bit about connecting with the ancestors, which I think is so important during these difficult times, is to have support, non-local support, that can really help you from time to time. And even if you're not sure you're having it, to go somebody, a lot of people around that are psychic, that are intuitive, that you can go and talk to and get advice from, and help yourself along the way. So thanks for coming, and hope to see you in October. Anybody who wants to stick around and chat, very welcome. Seeing a few of them there, or one or two.
Laura May has a question here.
Sorry?
Laura had a question over here. I don't know if it's...
Okay, what are the ramifications? Let me get that.
I could read it to you if you want. What are the ramifications for us of modern culture that we are not aware of, the darker forces, whether we are creating them or subject to them in some other way?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I know a lot of people don't want to think of that, but if you look at, I think I'm going to give a talk on it, especially now. Most people do not believe in this stuff, including white South Africans who've grown up amongst Africans who do believe in witchcraft and sorcery and dark forces. I remember giving lectures in South Africa and asking the audience, who here only believes that witchcraft works if you believe in it? In other words, the nocebo response, almost every single white person put up their hand, and none of the blacks did, because they're far better educated. So these dark forces come in many different guises, and essentially they can be dark forces on this side of the veil between the worlds, and they can be dark forces on the other side of the veil between the worlds. And these are real. The church knows about it. Some of the churches know about it. but they teach it in such a way as to give you the fear of hell and damnation, which is not a good thing, because you should do things out of love, not out of fear. But nevertheless, they do know some of the truth that's out there. So essentially, these forces are there to sabotage our progress up the hierarchy of vibration, up the tree of life or the chakra system or whatever you want to say. They become more and more prevalent the higher up you get along the way. And the answer is to say the single biggest ally of the dark forces is in making you believe they do not exist. Because if you don't think they are there, they can work with impunity. So if you don't know you've been bewitched, for instance, you're a white guy in South Africa who's been bewitched because you've offended your black employee and you screwed him out of money, and now he's gone to a witch because he can't afford an attorney, and he's bewitched you, and somehow you start to feel that something's not right, and you're accident prone, weird things are happening to you. So that's because you don't know these things exist and you deny them. So denial is the first thing that's really important. So even among shamans, I've had instances where I've seen people who are doing shamanic work, and they say, all I do is I surround myself in a bubble of light and I know I'm going to be fine. Well, that's true if you're working at a very low tender vibration where your tricksters are not going to be that prevalent, or if they are prevalent, they're low-level tricksters. They're just there to have fun in a way. But then if you get more serious, if you get into the love triangle and you start to get above that into the triangle of becoming on the tree of life, you're getting up at the top, you're going to have serious opposition. And you're not going to know it's coming because they don't want you to know it's them. So one of the easiest way of them affecting things are with electronics. They can affect, good spirits and bad spirits can make lights go on and off, and they can do weird stuff with electronics because it's easy to do. If you think of electronics and the expertise of some of what I would call the spiritual mafia, they have access to, say, Steve Jobs is maybe working for them because they are so good at interfering with electronics. They know the weak points in the electronics, they can go for it. So somebody would say, oh, this is just incidental, whereas it's not incidental. So for most of you, you don't have to worry about it. For me, I have to worry about it. Why? Because I see clients, I'm reversing witchcraft and I'm sending dark forces away. So I've attracted the attention of the spiritual mafia. You don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But you can get tricksters, and you can, what ancestors call get mosquitoes at your picnic. They're going to ruin your picnic and make you not have fun. But then, you might take a trip that you're looking forward to, and it turns out to be a disaster because tricksters had some play in it. Those are mosquitoes at your picnic. Your flight was delayed or whatever. Traffic delayed you because you overslept, and maybe they had something to do with it. So the ramifications are very important, because if you look at the occult, Hitler was a master of the occult. So I think Hitler was in direct alliance with Satan, or a satanic-like figure. And if you look at Star Wars, Darth Vader is just an instrument of what they call the Sith. There's this other thing that's more satanic that's controlling Darth Vader. So I think if you watch Star Wars, you'll see it's a brilliant rendition of the way the cosmos works. So in a way, Satan is the one that's operating behind the scenes, and most of us will not have to worry about that. But he has allies and other people. Dark forces are there to assist him in what he's doing. So Hitler had tremendous success, more success than you would have believed, kind of like Putin is having, because no doubt you have people who have got soul loss. They get possessed much more easily by these dark forces who manipulate them. Idi Amin lived to be a ripe old age, and he was assisted. He would be in a cavalcade, and then he would stop and he would say, I'm getting out of the car, because it was in the front, and he would go to the back, and then they would go around the corner and the front car would blow up. That's dark stuff working on his behalf, keeping him safe. You can be sure that Putin, and I think he's running out of his luck now, but those kind of guys have help from the other side. They're not alone because they conscript them. They want them. They've got an evil inclination. They don't want anybody to have anything that they can't have. He's the wealthiest guy in the world. So this is, I think I'm going to stop there because I don't want to freak you guys out, especially my kids always say, Dad, don't talk about that stuff. But the reality is the mythology is not mythology. It came out of truth. And it's nice to go and watch the mythology on movies, but it's real. It's not going to affect most of you. For most of you, it'll be mosquitoes at the picnic. But if you're working in the shamanic realm, you are going to have more opposition. If you are in a bodhisattva and you run a Buddhist ashram, you're going to have more opposition. And the Buddhists say, just focus on your spiritual practice, which does help you. But it's nice to know that there are tricksters around, because if you don't know, you're not going to know they're against you. Your ego may not be enough. Your spiritual practice may not be enough. And that's where the Celtic wisdom comes in, the Druid wisdom comes in, the Kabbalistic wisdom comes in, the African wisdom comes in. They're all in alignment. They all say the same thing. If you're going to be on a spiritual path, or you're going to be an important person somewhere doing important stuff, politically or otherwise, you're going to be either assisted by these forces, or you're going to be sabotaged by these forces. So, Laura, I like your question. Maybe it'll lead us to have another talk on this. I'm always worried to give a talk like this because it usually gets sabotaged. Everything goes wrong. But I might do it in a more dilute form. But I don't think you should worry about it because it's not going to affect most of you. But if you get way up high on the spiritual hierarchy, you're going to be opposed. It's actually a compliment. It's called a costly compliment by the ancestors. If you're up there in a high vibration, you will be opposed. No ifs or buts. And you need to be prepared for it. And this is where the power of medicinal plants come in, the power of talismans come in, the power of protective rituals come in. All those things, because you've got to ask to receive from your ancestors. They can't help you unless you ask. So before the talk, I asked to receive a good talk. Doesn't mean there's going to be a perfect talk. There can still be interference. But if I don't ask, then they have free reign. They have free reign anyway, but most of the time we're reasonably well protected, but not always. Any other questions?
Well, Sonia had that one. What was the best way to protect oneself from such dark forces?
I think the main thing I would say is spiritual practice. Try to become non-local, get an ancestral practice, acknowledge your guides. You may not have guides that you don't know about. So put a crystal on your altar, get an altar, check out the DVD. It's Connecting with Spiritual Guides and how they can script your dreams. So be protected from the other side can help you. Then you can ask to receive, and you ask to receive through a talisman, through a prayer, through if something important is going to happen. You go to your altar, you light some incense, you light a candle and saying, look, I'm going on this trip today or whatever, I want your protection. You put your talisman or whatever it is, you can put some, if it's a locket, you can put some sacred medicine in it. If you're really under attack, you need somebody who can help you, who's got the expertise, but you can do it for yourself through your own guides, your own ancestors. Don't put toxic ancestors on your altar, only ones that love you. You can expand your altar to include people that are dead, that loved you, like a teacher or a friend or a loved one, anything like that. So it's another whole subject on its own, but I think an ancestral altar, spiritual practice, ask to receive, talismans, they all help you. Purifications, the things that really help you are sacred sounds, a rattle, a Tibetan gong, anything with a high vibration repels negative forces. Sage your home if you're worried, sage yourself, sage your friend, smudge yourself. These are all things you can do. Or take a bath and put sacred medicine in the bath and ask to receive in the bath. The sacred medicine will change the vibration of the bath. And also it's a ritual, a container for request to the spirit world. You've got guides, you've got ancestors that probably from past lives who loved you. Invoke them. If you know who they are, write their names, put a picture on your altar, put anything that holds their energy, a ring or a watch or a cup there. And keep asking to receive, because everything in spirit world works with intention. You've got to ask to receive, attention to detail. You have to tell them exactly what you want. It's for a very particular thing. I need help today for this thing in particular. You can't say, help me with my life. They can't do that. Free will is the cosmic law and it's cut in stone. And remember that they are living in a non-space-time reality. Free will for them is in the present moment. So you've got to take action, you've got to affirm, maintain, sustain the intention. If it's something for the long term, you've got to keep reminding them, even if it's just with a mantra, that you need their help, and go to your altar, not every day, but maybe once a week, although every day is also good. And then gratitude is how we thank them. And they want to be appreciated. They're human, they're normal. They need appreciation. So I think we can end on that note, unless there's somebody else or any last thing of clarification or otherwise.
I'm Gina here. I do have a question. You say free will is the law of the universe, and our ancestors need our request, our permission to help us. Doesn't that also apply then to the dark forces? I mean, aren't we also kind of giving them permission to?
No, because you're asking permission for something that's going to help other people. It's a permission for do something that's on the light side. For instance, for the talk, I'm going to be helping somebody. I'm asking permission for them to help me with this. But you're absolutely right. You don't have to give the dark forces permission to do what they have to do, because they don't have to abide by the law of free will. They can interfere anyway. They can interfere anyway. But if you are a witch, you can ask to receive, and you do this in ritual the same way as I do it, and it also works. And then it becomes more powerful, because then their focus is more localized on a particular thing. So you are not here, you're a person of the light. So when you're asking to receive, the best thing, and it's a good question, because it's always more powerful if you get yourself out of the way of your request and it's for the greater good. Or if it's for yourself, then that's okay, but it should also be for the greater good. Because if you have a car, you can do more with your car, and you can help people because you can travel or whatever it is. So no, the dark forces will come, and they will oppose you. They will only help you if you've got an evil eye or an evil tongue.
Well, I don't mean that. I would want them to help me. I mean, if free will is that they can't even hurt me unless I've given them permission to hurt me.
No, they can, because they don't go by that law.
Well, okay.
They don't obey the law of free will. That's why they're dark forces.
Okay, I guess that's the main.
And the only reason that they don't have the advantage is because love is more powerful than fear. If love was less powerful than fear, we would all be screwed. They would have the upper hand.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, well, that's a good question. They're always good questions, because it always makes clarification for everybody else, and also myself. Well, have a great day, and I hope to see you in October. And I think Trevor is with the IT folks, has ironed out all the problems. If you are in Santa Barbara and you want to attend, it's really always nice to have a group. We had 12 last time, and so the talk was great because we had people there. And if more and more people, we used to get many more before COVID. If we get more than 12 or 15, then we'll probably go into the auditorium, which will be very safe. But COVID is all over the place, so be careful. Guard yourself. I know somebody who just went on a trip to Canada with an N95 mask and got COVID. So, she's fine, but, it was made the holiday unpleasant for her. So be very wary. I don't know how things are wherever you guys are, but, where we are in Santa Barbara, it's relatively benign. Nobody's wearing masks. But if you go into a space where there are a lot of people, especially if you're going to a movie or you're sitting down for a long period of time, you're exposed more prominently. If you're just walking past someone, you're vaccinated, you'll be fine. But be careful and use your masks when you're in close spaces with a lot of people for a lot length of time. Otherwise, you don't have to worry. So I'll end on that note, and take care, and thanks for coming.